And the Rosicrucian system is one that's been very influential in the West, but actually it's sometimes hard to get information about what their actual system of development is. So we're going to try to present that tonight. You might have noticed that we have around in various locations some of the classical depictions of initiation processes coming from European alchemy and from the Rosicrucian tradition. And these often present in an allegorical form the different types of stages one goes through for spiritual development. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rudolf Gilbert. I've been involved in Rosicrucian studies for about 25 years. When I got out of the Marine Corps in the mid-'80s, I began an intensive search of different spiritual traditions, and was particularly fascinated by European Rosicrucianism and the work of Rudolf Steiner. And having looked into many, many different Rosicrucian groups and teachers, it's my personal opinion that Rudolf Steiner's work is the most advanced Rosicrucian work.
Very important that during these early years a child should be surrounded by noble-minded, generous-hearted, and affectionate people with good thoughts, for these stamp themselves on the child's inner life.
The Rosicrucians talk about a process within an initiation in which at a certain point, when the heart becomes open and unarmored, and we cultivate this feeling of unconditional love, there is an ignition of a kind of spiritual spark within the heart. And what happens then is that they describe it as an etheric rose light arises from the heart and moves up to what's commonly called the third eye center. And with that rose etheric stream, it enters into the centers in the head, that area that is technically at the third ventricle of the brain and was known as the cave of Brahma in the Indian teachings. This is a particular area that's open in the head that has a space between the pineal and pituitary glands. And as this space becomes illuminated, it leads to direct spiritual vision.
Let us imagine two people. One is in distress because of his karma. The other helps him because he has the power to do so. And in this way, the karma of the former is improved. Does this undermine the karmic law? On the contrary, it confirms it. It is precisely the working of the law of karma which makes the help effective. If someone has more power than this, he may be able to help 2 or 3 or 4 others if they are in need. Someone still more powerful may be able to help hundreds or thousands and influence their karma for the better. And if he is as powerful as Christianity represents Christ to be, he may help the whole of humanity just at a time when it is in special need of help. The essence and task of Freemasonry, from the point of view of spiritual science. Today I wish to make a brief survey of the rites and orders of Freemasonry, as I agreed to do. Of course, I can only impart to you the main essentials, as the whole subject is so comprehensive and so many inessential things are connected with it. The basis for the whole of Freemasonry is to be found in the temple legend concerning Hiram Abiff, or Adon Hiram, about whom I have already spoken in connection with the Rosicrucian order. Everything to do with what is called the secret of Freemasonry and its tendency is expressed in this temple legend. We are led to a kind of genesis or theory of evolution of the human race. Let us therefore recall to mind the essentials of this temple legend. One of the Elohim united himself with Eve, and out of this union of a divine creative spirit with Eve, Cain was born. Then another of the Elohim, Jehovah or Adonai, created Adam, who is to be regarded as the primal man of the third root race. This Adam then united himself with Eve, and from this union Abel was born. Thus, at the outset of human evolution, there are 2 starting points. Cain, the direct descendant of one of the Elohim with Eve, and Abel, who with the help of the divinely created human being Adam, is the true representative of Jehovah. The whole conception underlying the creation story, according to the temple legend, is based upon the fact that there is a kind of enmity between Jehovah and everything that is derived from the other Elohim and their descendants, the, quote, sons of fire, close quote. This being the designation of the descendants of Cain, according to the temple legend. Jehovah creates enmity between Cain and his race and Abel and his race. The outcome of this was that Cain slew Abel. That is the archenemy, which exists between those who receive their existence from the divine worlds and those who work out everything for themselves. The fact that Abel makes the sacrifice of an animal to Jehovah, while Cain brings the fruits of the earth, is an illustration, which the Bible gives too, of this contrast between the race of Cain and the race of Abel. Cain has to wrest from the earth with hard labor the fruits which are necessary for the sustenance of mankind. Abel takes what is already living, what has been prepared for his livelihood. The race of Cain creates, as it were, the living out of the lifeless. Abel takes up what is already alive, what is already imbued with the breath of life. Abel's sacrifice is pleasing to God, but Cain's is not. Thus we find two kinds of human being characterized in Cain and Abel. The one consists of those who accept what God has prepared for them. The others, the free humanity, are those who till the soil and labor to win living products out of what is lifeless. Those who regard themselves as sons of Cain are they who understand the temple legend and wish to live by it. Out of the race of Cain spring all those who are the creators of the arts and sciences of mankind. Tubal-Cain, who is the first true architect and the god of smithies and working tools, and also Hiram Abiff, or Adon Hiram, who is the hero of the temple legend. This Hiram is sent for by King Solomon, famous for his wisdom, who belongs to the race of Abel, those who receive their wisdom from God. Thus this contrast appears once more at the court of Solomon. Solomon the wise and Hiram the independent worker, who has achieved his wisdom through human striving. Solomon called to his court Balkis, the queen of Sheba, and when she arrived, her impression of him was of a statue made of gold and precious stones. It was as though she were looking at a monument bestowed on mankind by the gods. As she gazed in wonderment at the great temple of Solomon, her desire was to meet the architect of this wonderful building, and her wish was fulfilled. Merely through a single glance which the architect cast on her, she was able to appreciate his true worth. Solomon was immediately seized by a kind of jealousy of Hiram. This grew as Balkis demanded that all the workers engaged in the building of the temple should be presented to her. Solomon declared that this was impossible, but Hiram conceded to her wishes. He climbed onto a slight eminence, made the mystical sign of the Tau, and behold, all the workers streamed toward him. The will of the queen had been fulfilled. Because of this, Solomon is disinclined to oppose the enemies of Hiram and to stand out against them. A Syrian stonemason, a Phoenician carpenter, and a Jewish miner were antagonistic toward Hiram. These three fellow craftsmen had been totally denied the master word by Hiram Abiff. The master word is that which would have enabled them to work independently as master builders. The master word is a secret that is imparted only to those who have made the grade. Therefore they came to the decision to do Hiram some harm. The opportunity for this came about as Hiram Abiff was about to fulfill his masterpiece, the casting of the molten sea. The movement of the waters was to be held fast in form. The surging sea was to be preserved alive, artistically, in a rigid form. That is the point. The three apprentices conspired to make the casting in such a way that instead of flowing into the mold, it would flow out over the surroundings. Hiram tried to arrest the flow of the fiery mass by throwing water over it, but this caused the metal to spray up into the air and descend again with great force in a rain of fire. Hiram was powerless to do anything. But suddenly a voice called out to him, "Hiram, Hiram, Hiram!" He was ordered by the voice to plunge into the sea of fire. This he did, and he sank down ever deeper until he reached the center of the earth, where fire has its origin. There he met two figures, his ancestor Tubal-Cain and Cain himself. Cain was irradiated with the brightness of Lucifer, the angel of light. Then Tubal-Cain gave Hiram his hammer, which had the magical property of restoring all things to their proper order. And he said to him, quote, "You will beget a son who will gather about him a race of wise folk, and you will be the progenitor of those who have been born out of fire, which brings wisdom and makes man thoughtful." Close quote. The molten sea was now restored by means of the hammer. Hiram and Queen Balkis then met again outside the city. She became his wife, but Hiram was unable to avert the jealousy of Solomon and the revenge of the three fellow craftsmen. He was slain by them. The only thing he was able to save was the triangle with the master word engraved upon it, which he threw into a deep well. Then Hiram was buried, and a branch of acacia was planted on his grave. The acacia branch betrayed the whereabouts of the grave to Solomon, and the triangle was also discovered. It was sealed up and buried in a place known to only a few people, 27 in all. It was agreed that the new master word should be the word first uttered after the finding of the corpse. It is the word which is used by the Freemasons. The Freemasons trace back their origin with some justification to the temple legend and to the old days in which the temple was built by Solomon as a lasting memorial to the secret of the fifth root race. And now we have to learn to understand how mankind can benefit by Freemasonry. That is not so easy. A person who gets to know something of the complicated initiation ceremonies of Freemasonry might be inclined to ask, is what takes place in such ceremonies very trivial and petty? I will now describe to you the initiation ceremony of an apprentice wishing to join the order of craft masonry. Just imagine someone has decided that he wants to become a member of the craft masonry. It consists of 3 degrees: apprentice, fellow craftsman, and master mason. After these 3 degrees come higher degrees, which lead the candidate into occult knowledge. The true deeper origin of Freemasonry, however, predates humanity entirely. It resides in light itself, which existed before mankind. That is most profound, and reveals for those who can understand it what theosophical wisdom has again made public through its description of the formation of the earth through the first 2 root races and into the 3rd, the time of Lemuria. Whoever can apprehend this through Freemasonry has received into himself something of tremendous importance. But that takes place in only the rarest cases. Those brothers, the discoverers of this secret, guarded it as a rare, self-acquired possession, and in order not to be misjudged or even derided by the man in the street, they concealed it by means of symbols, as we do to this day. Close quote. These symbols have been taken from the objects themselves, which have been engraved by nature. He who recognizes them for what they are, who can really read what they contain, comes into contact with their innermost being. He is led by them into their inner nature. These symbols portray the thing itself and do not have a merely symbolical meaning. Within Freemasonry, there is no one who is able to give guidance that would enable a person to arrive at the object itself. Quote, "These symbols are, however, no arbitrary chosen pictures, and they do not rest upon any chance occurrence, but are founded on the attributes of God and of man, and must be regarded as archetypal. But we will never take the form, the vessel, the ritual, the symbols for their content, but will seek the spiritual content within the form." Close quote. These words show, readers aside, there's a gap in the text, and of readers aside, for the symbol itself portrays the object. Quote, And when we have found this, the spiritual content, and have absorbed it into ourselves, we shall recognize through this spiritual content the absolute necessity of the form, the ritual, the symbolism. Our higher degrees themselves provide the brother with certain proof of the immortality of man. Close quote. Freemasonry will also be regenerated. In Freemasonry, the occultist has something very remarkable, something unprecedented, for it has something primeval in its foundation. It belongs to the most ancient of traditions, which has preserved almost 100 degrees in a precisely specialized structure, in spite of the fact that it has lost nearly all of its content, and that none of those belonging to it in Europe are able to form an adequate conception of it. But still, the thing is there, and one will only need to fill the whole outer husk with new content. The thing is there, waiting to be brought to life again. God had to descend to the physical world because the human faculty for perception could no longer raise itself above the world of the physical senses. For this reason came the mighty prophecy of John the Baptist, that the disposition of the human soul must change so that the kingdom of heaven can draw near. In earlier times, one could approach the kingdom of heaven to some degree through human clairvoyance. Now one had to find it in Christ himself through the medium of the senses. In order that humanity should not lose its link with the spiritual world during the dark age of Kali Yuga, Christ had to descend to the physical plane. The dark age lasted more than 5,000 years. We are living in the important time of the end of Kali Yuga. Since 1899, the Dark Age, which began in 3101 BC, has already run its course, and since then certain faculties of soul have slowly begun to develop that have not yet been recognized by human science. In this 20th century of ours, new faculties of the human soul will gradually evolve in a portion of humanity. Before the end of the century, for instance, it will be possible to perceive the human etheric body. Another faculty will be to look inward and behold as if in a dream the picture, the counterpart of a deed one is about to perform. Certain persons endowed in a particular way will have still another experience. What Paul experienced at Damascus, which was a personal experience for him, will become common experience for a certain number of people. One can perceive the significance of this event in the 20th century from the following. Paul could learn about everything that had happened in Palestine without its changing him from Saul to Paul. His condition of soul was such that he could not be convinced that the Christ lived in the man from Nazareth. At the event of Damascus, he could say for the first time with his clairvoyant consciousness, Christ exists. The people who will experience the event of Damascus in the 20th century will receive direct knowledge of Christ. They will not require documentary evidence in order to recognize Christ, but they will have direct knowledge, as is today possessed only by the initiates. All the faculties that today can be acquired by means of initiation will in the future be universal faculties of humanity. This condition of soul, this experiencing of soul, is called in esotericism the second coming of Christ. Christ will not be incarnated again in a physical body, but he will appear in an etheric body, as in the street near Damascus. Christ incarnated on the physical plane when humanity had become limited to the physical body. We can repeat today the words of John the Baptist, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Or change the disposition of your soul so that your own faculties open the spiritual world to you. Human beings with etheric clairvoyance will thus behold the Christ appearing before them in an etheric body. The faculties I have just described are lying like seeds in the soul. In the future they will be developed, and one will be able to say that the destiny of a person lies to a certain extent in his own hands. When this etheric vision appears, however, It will be necessary for people to know the significance of these faculties. It will be impossible then to fall back into materialism as people do today. One will not be immediately aware of the faculties when they appear, and those who possess them will even be regarded as sick or deluded by fantasy. Communicating the fundamental wisdom of spiritual science, thus, is not optional, but is a necessary measure for the evolution of humanity. What we have said will often be repeated in the years to come, but it is vital that it be understood correctly. It is possible that materialistic tendencies will penetrate the Theosophical Society, even to the point that one will believe that Christ will take on a material body when he comes again. If this were to be the case, one could assert that humanity has made no progress at all in the last 2,000 years. Christ appeared 2,000 years ago in a physical body to be perceived by the physical senses. For future clairvoyance, he will appear in an etheric body. By means of spiritual science, we are preparing ourselves to understand the significant era ahead of us. To be anthroposophists, it is not enough to understand anthroposophy in a theoretical way. We must bring it to life within ourselves. It will be necessary to observe this great event with complete exactness. There will be ambitious persons who try out of the materialistic direction of theosophy today to profit for themselves by making believe that they are the Christ, and they will find people who believe them. For the true anthroposophist, it will be a test to arm himself against such attempts, and instead of debasing human feeling in such a way, to raise it up to the spiritual worlds. Those who understand anthroposophy in the right way will say to these false messiahs of the 20th century, "You have announced the appearance of Christ on the physical plane, but we know that Christ will manifest himself only in an etheric form." True anthroposophists will await Christ's appearance to the higher senses. A person must, before his death, have understood the true significance of this second coming of Christ. Those who will not have these faculties, who have not been able on earth to understand the significance of Christ's second coming, however, must await a new incarnation to be able to acquire this understanding on the physical plane. We are living in an extremely important epoch. We must characterize the event of Christ's second coming, which will be perceived by clairvoyant human beings. We can characterize this event by directing our attention to the cosmos and by alluding to an event that is approaching in our own day. This event is the appearance of Halley's Comet, which is also an important subject of study in Rosicrucian theosophy. The appearance of this comet is connected with events in the spiritual world. Just as the movements of the planets circling the sun correspond to the regular events in the evolution of humanity, so the appearance of a comet corresponds to an influence that runs counter to the regular events. Rosicrucian research has demonstrated that every comet exerts a particular influence on human evolution. The present comet has as its particular influence an intense impulse toward materialism. Every time Halley's Comet has appeared, a new impulse toward materialism has taken place. Its appearance in 1759 corresponded with the epoch in which Voltaireanism was at its high point. The appearance in 1835 corresponded with the materialism of Molschat, Büchner, and others. In the same way, in our time, there will be a new impulse toward materialism, and the outer sign of this is the appearance of the comet. Those who let themselves be swayed by its influence will fall into the deepest materialism. Today, not only this impulse exists, but there is also another influence, which is to raise humanity to spiritual heights. This will be observed by those who understand the signs of the times. One must become wiser through truth, but one must also speak ever more courageously of the truth as of a spiritual blood that we wish to allow to flow into our feeling and will.